When President Obama took office, the only cabinet official he kept from the Bush administration was the Secretary of Defense, his name Robert Gates. Gates left the Pentagon last year. He is writing a memoir and has become the chancellor of his alma mater, the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. That's where we spoke about this new phase of his life and the dangers that America still faces. How would you assess our national security today?
There are many diverse challenges. None are probably existential at this point, but all of them are challenges, and all of them have to be dealt with. And the problem is that crises and problems just keep coming up, and nothing ever goes away. And what people, I think, don't understand is that we have this gigantic national security apparatus that people talk about, but when push comes to shove, it's 8 people that have to deal with all of these issues sitting around the table in the Situation Room, led by the president.
Those people are the president, the vice president, the secretary of state, the secretary of defense, the national security advisor, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. That's 6.
The director of national intelligence and director of CIA.
And director of CIA. That brings me to a specific, which is the night of the bin Laden raid and the assassination and the
one
killing.
Where we pledged each other we would never go out public with operational details.
And how long did that last?
5 hours.
So you're sitting in that room. What were your concerns?
My major concern, I had no doubts that the SEALs could perform the mission. My concern was whether or not he was there. People don't realize that made the decision tough for the president was we didn't have one single piece of hard data that he was actually in that compound. Not one. The whole thing was a circumstantial case built by analysts at CIA.
There was no single person who could tell you he was in that building. Absolutely. No single person had seen him in that building.
Right. The crux of the decision revolved less about the efficacy of the military piece of it than the consequences for us if he wasn't there, in terms of the relationship with Pakistan, in terms of the war in Afghanistan.
What were your worries about these Navy SEALs going in that had been informed by your experience at CIA?
Well, I wanted to make sure that if things all went south, right. That we had
they
enough,
had more people in there
we
than
had enough
imagined.
Capability to get them out and to get them back to Afghanistan.
It is said that you wanted to bomb and not go in.
My primary concern was the reaction of the Pakistanis if we went in there and he wasn't there. My view was, let's kill him, but let's use a missile of some kind. The objection to that was, well, we couldn't collect any information to exploit, and we won't know for sure whether we got him. My view was, you'll know. It may take a few months, and it's not as dramatic, and you won't get the headline that you will on the SEAL raid. But you have if you think he's there, that's probably the least risky way to take him out. But the President asked for my view, and I told him, I said, maybe, Mr. President, I've been in this job too long, and I've become too cautious. And he said, he actually was very reassuring. He said, no, you've raised lots of questions that I have to think about. But I've always thought it was a very courageous call. If this mission had failed, it could have put the war in Afghanistan at risk. And that was one of my principal concerns.
Which brings me to Iran. You have said that was the most difficult problem you had to find, or the worst problem for finding a good answer.
Correct.
What are the choices?
The only good option is putting enough pressure on the Iranian government that they make the decision for themselves that continuing to seek nuclear weapons is actually harming the security of the country, and perhaps more importantly to them, putting the regime itself at risk. And there are signs that those sanctions are beginning to really bite, and some much more severe European Union sanctions will come into effect this summer.
What if Israel does it on its own?
That would be worse than us doing it, because I think that then has lots of regional complications that may end up in a much larger Middle East conflict. So I think that would be worse.
You can answer this question as well as anyone I know. Having said all the things you have just said, do you give President Obama high marks in the national security arena?
Well, if I don't, I'm sort of giving myself a fucking grade. So
well,
there's that sort of...
Fair enough, okay. Yes, indeed you are. Indeed you are.
I think that... let me answer the question this way.
Congratulations.
I had no difficulty as Secretary of Defense moving from the Bush administration to the Obama administration. The situation in Iraq, that path had already been cleared. The new president sent additional troops into Afghanistan. He was as aggressive, if not more so, in going after terrorists and Al-Qaeda. I think that the relationship with China has been managed pretty well. So yeah, I think they've done a pretty good job.
What's the difference in the way President Obama acts in the councils of national security policy and the way President Bush acted?
Well, you just have to read about it in the book.
Well, I know, but give me a hint. I will, and with great pleasure, I will, and I look forward to having you to talk about the book when it comes. But just give us a sense of how you see that.
I think President Obama goes out of his way to make sure he hears from everybody. He'll not only go around the table in the Situation Room, he'll go around the backbench to hear from the sort of second and third tier officials. President Bush welcomed this debate and discussion, but he didn't sort of point his finger at people and say, what do you think?
And what instincts did President Bush have, say, that President Obama didn't have?
I think, well, first of all, you have to put both of these presidents in, and when I knew them, in perspective. President Bush was in the last 2 years of 8 years as president. He was never going to run for office again, and most of the big decisions had already been made. I worked for President Obama in the very first 2 years of his administration. Here's a president who knew from the beginning that he was going to run for re-election, but he also had a lot to learn in terms of the national security arena. Frankly, I think he was an incredibly fast learner, and his desire to get a broad range of views was highly commendable.
We are sitting here on a campus created in 1693, the second university created in the United States. So it's full of history, and history is to be learned from.
Well, my favorite quote, and I use it in commencement addresses, is from John Adams, and it is to the effect that, and it was in a letter to his one of his sons, and he wrote, public business must be done. It will be done one way or another. If wise men refuse it, others will not. If honest men refuse it, others will not. And then I always say to these young people, will the wise and honest among you come help us lead America?
A couple of things about that. John Adams today would say wise men and wise women, for sure.
Yes, for sure.
Secondly, this is an interesting man because he has served since 1966, 8 presidents. The CIA, he's been in part of really important decisions. He sat there in that Situation Room and heard about the problems with the helicopter, knowing that he'd been part of the team that was looking at the situation when Jimmy Carter's team went into Iran and it failed.
Oh, that's right.
And he said he almost had a heart attack.
That's right.
Because he thought, oh my God, could it be happening again? You know?
The whole story, though, Charlie, to me is so fascinating to get all the behind-the-scenes details. To hear that they didn't know for sure that Osama bin Laden was in it. When I first heard that, that was a wow for me. And for him to say that he had a different idea about how it should be handled, and in the end, President Obama said, we're going to go this way. Did he feel slighted that the president take his advice?
No,
or what was his feeling about that?
That he owed it to the president to give him his best advice, and he respected and understood that it was the president's responsibility to choose from the advice that he got, but it is the loneliness of the office to have to make the choice, and only the president can do that.
Yeah.
Interesting, too, and this sort of touches on your point, Gail, what he said about the way President Obama really pulls everybody in the room.
Yeah.
So sort of no one is safe in that environment.
Exactly
you all
right.
need to have an opinion to be able to back it up.
Right. I mean, that's it. They both are curious people who reach the presidency. The other thing that he said about that is only the toughest decisions come to the president.
That's right.
Everything else is decided before it gets there.
Yeah, so once it reaches the president's level, it's a big one.
You know, the other interesting thing is that obviously in conversation like this took place at William and Mary. This is a man who's becoming the chancellor, which is a ceremonial job. George Washington was the chancellor at William and Mary. Thomas Jefferson graduated from William and Mary, and so did Jon Stewart. A scholar of comedy.
What a fine note to close on, Charlie Rose.
Thank you, Charlie.